You have a name, a face, a past. People who know exactly where you came from. Now imagine waking up tomorrow and deciding none of that is real anymore. New name, new country, new identity, entire new life. And pulling it off so completely that kings believe you, banks trust you, armies follow you. That is not fiction. That happened 40 times. And by the end of this video, you will never look at the person next to you the same way again. 1. In the 1820s, a Scottish adventurer named Gregor MacGregor walked into London and announced he was the ruling Prince of Poitiers, a prosperous Central American nation. He had maps, printed currency, and a full guidebook describing the capital city. Over 200 families sold everything they owned and sailed across the Atlantic to start new lives. When they arrived, Anasa there was nothing but jungle and swamp. Over 150 people died. MacGregor was arrested in France, acquitted, and immediately returned to London to sell the same fake country all over again. 2. Around the year 1600, a young Basque woman named Catalina de Rauso escaped from a Spanish convent, cut her hair, bound her chest flat, and enlisted in the army disguised as a man. She spent the next 15 years as a soldier and conquistador in South America, surviving real battles, street fights, and duels. Nobody suspected her true identity. When the truth came out after a near-fatal wound, she was not punished. The Pope himself granted her special permission to continue living as a man for the rest of her life. 3. Ferdinand Waldo de Mara was an American man with no medical training and no academic qualifications of any kind. In the early 1950s during the Korean War, he stole the identity of a real surgeon, boarded a Royal Canadian Navy ship, and performed actual operations on wounded soldiers, including removing a bullet dangerously close to a man's heart. Every patient survived. He later impersonated a prison warden, a college professor, a civil engineer, and a Trappist monk in different countries. His method never changed. Steal an identity, memorize the textbook overnight, walk in like he owned the room. 4. Han van Meegeren was a Dutch painter in the early 20th century who felt humiliated and ignored by the art establishment. His response was extraordinary. He spent years learning to replicate the exact style and technique of the 17th century Dutch master, Johannes Vermeer, right down to the aging cracks in the paint. He then produced entirely new Vermeer paintings and sold them as lost masterpieces. Senior officials of the occupying regime purchased several. After World War II, arrested for collaborating with the enemy, he confessed they were all forgeries. Nobody believed him, so he painted another Vermeer live in front of police to prove it. Keep watching. The next one personally changed the outcome of World War II. 5. Juan Pujol Garcia was a Spanish poultry farmer living in Barcelona during World War II with no spy training and no military connections. Determined to help defeat the opposing forces, he first approached British intelligence and was rejected. So he then went directly to the other side, convinced them he was a loyal undercover agent working in their favor, and began feeding them completely fabricated intelligence reports using nothing but tourist guidebooks and library maps. The British eventually found out and recruited him. Together, they built a fictional spy network of 27 agents. His false report on the eve of D-Day in 1944 convinced the enemy high command to hold back their tank divisions long enough for the Allied landing to succeed. 6. Dr. James Barry was one of the most accomplished and respected military surgeons in the entire British Empire during the 19th century, performing one of Africa's first recorded successful cesarean sections in 1826. Barry rose to the rank of Inspector General of Hospitals and served across multiple continents for nearly 5 decades. When Barry died in 1865, the person who prepared the body discovered that Dr. James Barry had been assigned female at birth. Barry had enrolled at Edinburgh Medical School, presenting as male at approximately 15 years old. Not one person in the British Army had ever known. 7. In 1817, a young woman appeared in the small English village of Almondsbury, dressed in exotic clothing and speaking a language that no scholar, linguist, or widely traveled sailor could identify. A Portuguese sailor eventually claimed he could translate and announced she was Princess Caribou, royalty from a distant island in the Indian Ocean. Aristocratic families hosted her. why newspapers celebrated her across Britain. Then a boarding house owner in Bristol recognized her face. She was Mary Baker, a cobbler's daughter from Devon, who had invented the language, the culture, and the entire royal identity completely from her own imagination. 8. In the late 1800s, a French woman named Thérèse Humbert told Paris banks she had inherited 100 million francs from a mysterious American millionaire named Robert Henry Crawford. The money was locked in a safe in her home, sealed by a legal dispute until a court case in America was resolved. Using only this story, she borrowed millions of francs and lived lavishly for 20 years, hosting powerful politicians and aristocrats. When investigators forced the safe open in 1902, inside they found one old newspaper, one copper coin, and one trouser button. 20 years. Millions of francs. One trouser button. We are not even halfway through. Stay with me because what comes next involves a man literally fired out of a cannon, a teenager who fooled an entire royal court, and someone who went back to high school at 32. 9. Around the year 1600, an unidentified young man appeared in Poland, claiming to be Dmitry Ivanovich, the youngest son of Tsar Ivan the Terrible of Russia, who had been believed dead since childhood. Polish nobles backed him with an army. He invaded Russia and in 1605 was actually crowned Tsar. He ruled for 11 months before furious Russian nobles stormed the Kremlin, killed him, and burned his body. They then loaded his ashes into a cannon and fired them toward Poland. That is not a metaphor, and they literally shot him out of a cannon. 10. In 1925, a Czechoslovakian con artist named Victor Lustig read a single newspaper article mentioning that the Eiffel Tower in Paris was becoming expensive to maintain. Within days, he had forged French government documents, invented an official title for himself, and invited 6 scrap metal dealers to a private meeting where he offered to sell them the tower for demolition. One dealer paid the full asking price plus a bribe. By the time the man realized what happened, Lustig had already left the country. He then came back to Paris and sold the Eiffel Tower to an entirely different buyer. He later separately swindled Al Capone out of $50,000. 11. In 1993, a Scottish man named Brian McKinnon had been rejected from medical school years earlier and could not move past it. His solution was to go back to secondary school at the age of 32, dye his hair, adopt a Canadian accent, and enroll under the fake name Brandon Lee, pretending to be a 16-year-old student. He attended his own former school near Glasgow. Not one teacher or classmate recognized him. He became the top student in his year, earned a university medical school place, and studied there for a full year before a newspaper investigation exposed the truth. 12. In the 1840s, a woman known as Lola Montez became one of the most celebrated and scandalous entertainers in Europe, performing as a Spanish dancer and using her charm to captivate powerful men across the continent. She eventually won the complete devotion of King Ludwig I of Bavaria, who gave her a palace, a royal title, and significant political influence. Her interference in Bavarian politics became so extreme that it contributed to the Revolution of 1848, which forced Ludwig to abdicate his throne. The shocking part is that Lola Montez was not Spanish at all. Her real name was Eliza Gilbert, and she was born in County Sligo, Ireland. 13. In the early 1900s, a Canadian woman named Cassie Chadwick arranged for a prominent Cleveland lawyer to accidentally witness her leaving the private New York home of Andrew Carnegie, the richest man in America at the time. She made sure he noticed what appeared to be a signed financial document from Carnegie worth millions. She never confirmed or denied the rumor that followed. Banks across Ohio concluded she must be Carnegie's secret heir and competed to lend her tens of millions in today's money. Not one banker thought to contact Carnegie directly to verify. When the scheme collapsed in 1904, multiple banks failed and Cassie died in prison. 14. In the early 1700s, a man who called himself George Salmanazar appeared in London society, claiming to be a native of Formosa, which is present-day Taiwan. He described a culture that practiced ritual cannibalism, invented a complete written alphabet and grammar for a language he called Formosan, and published a 400-page book about the island's history. Oxford University invited him to teach. The Church of England funded his work. He was almost certainly a Frenchman who had never left Europe. When a genuine missionary who had actually lived in Asia exposed him, the whole story collapsed. He spent his final years in deep remorse. The next one fooled an entire nation for 60 years. Then one DNA test ended everything in a single afternoon. 15. In 1920, a woman was pulled out of a canal in Berlin, Germany, following a period of deep personal crisis. She refused to identify herself for weeks. When she finally spoke, she claimed to be Grand Duchess Anastasia, the youngest daughter of Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, who had been executed along with her entire family in 1918. She became known as Anna Anderson and for 60 years was the most debated royal claimant in history. She married an American professor and maintained her claim until her death in 1984. DNA testing in the 90s conclusively proved she was a Polish factory worker named Franciszka Szankowska. 16. In the late 1990s, a young American journalist named Stephen Glass was considered one of the brightest rising stars in political media, writing for The New Republic, one of Washington's most prestigious magazines. His stories were detailed, dramatic, and compelling. None of them were real. Glass had been fabricating sources, inventing quotes, and manufacturing entire events from scratch. When editors began asking questions, he created fake websites and bogus voicemail accounts to impersonate the fictional sources he had invented. A Forbes reporter eventually noticed a company in one of his stories did not exist anywhere. Investigations found fabrications in nearly every single article he had published. He was 25 years old. 17. In 1906, a German man named Wilhelm Voigt had spent most of his adult life in and out of prison, had no military rank, and no authority over anyone. One afternoon, he walked into a second-hand shop in Berlin and purchased a used Prussian army captain's uniform. He put it on, stepped outside, and began issuing commands to a group of soldiers he found on the street. They followed without question. He marched them to the town hall of Köpenick, placed the mayor under arrest by order of the Kaiser, and emptied the municipal treasury of 4,000 marks before quietly changing clothes and disappearing. And a statue of him still stands in Köpenick today. 18. In 1956, a book called The Third Eye became a massive international bestseller. Its author, who went by the name Tuesday Lobsang Rampa, claimed to be a Tibetan Buddhist Lama who had undergone a mystical surgical operation in childhood to open his third eye, granting him supernatural powers of perception. Publishers across Europe and America printed hundreds of thousands of copies. A private detective hired by a skeptical publisher eventually traced the author to a house in suburban England. His real name was Cyril Hoskin, son of a plumber from Devon, who had never set foot in Tibet and could not speak a single word of Tibetan. When confronted, he claimed a Tibetan monk's spirit had entered his body after a fall from a tree. 19. In the late 1940s, a mysterious turbaned figure named Korla Pandit began appearing on early American television, billed as a musical prodigy from New Delhi, India. He never spoke on camera. He simply gazed into the lens with quiet intensity while performing simultaneously on organ and piano. He became one of the very first stars of American television and held audiences for over 50 years. After his death in 1998, journalist R.J. Smith discovered the truth. Korla Pandit was born John Roland Redd, a black man from St. Louis, Missouri. In the harshly segregated America of the 1940s, reinventing himself as an Indian mystic was the only door the entertainment industry would open for him. Stay to the end. Number 40 will not shock you. It will make you genuinely uncomfortable about yourself. That is something completely different. To 20, a mysterious figure known as the Count of Saint-Germain first appeared at the French royal court around 1748. He spoke at least 6 languages without any detectable accent, played the violin brilliantly, and calmly told anyone who would listen that he was several thousand years old. He claimed personal knowledge of Jesus Christ, said he had attended the biblical wedding at Cana, and insisted he possessed an elixir that prevented death. Nobody could prove otherwise. The philosopher Voltaire described him as the man who never dies and who knows everything. King Louis XV used him for secret diplomatic missions. His true identity was never established. 21. The Chevalier d'Eon was an 18th century French diplomat, soldier, and spy who served King Louis XV with great distinction, and earning military decorations during the 7 Years' War and carrying out sensitive espionage missions across Europe. For the second half of life, by direct royal decree from King Louis XVI, the Chevalier was required to live and dress publicly as a woman. London gambling houses ran wagers worth millions in today's money debating the Chevalier's biological sex. When the Chevalier died in 1810, an autopsy revealed an anatomically male body. The physicians reportedly stood in silence for a long time before anyone spoke. 22. In the 1880s, an American con artist named James Addison Rivas began one of the most elaborate land frauds in history. He forged Spanish colonial land grant documents, backdating them by over a century, and used them to claim legal ownership of 17,000 square miles of territory across what is now Arizona and New Mexico, a landmass larger than several European countries. He physically traveled to archives in Seville, Spain, and inserted fake historical parchments into genuine colonial records that scholars had trusted for generations. Settlers, railroad companies, and mining operations paid him for years. The fraud collapsed when a government surveyor noticed the ink on certain historical documents was far too fresh. 23. In the mid-1700s, a man who called himself Count Alessandro di Cagliostro traveled through the royal courts of Europe, claiming he could turn lead into gold, reverse aging, and cure any disease with his alchemical knowledge. Wealthy aristocrats paid him extraordinary sums. Nor his real name was Giuseppe Balsamo, a career criminal born in Palermo, Sicily in 1743, who had correctly understood that the European nobility would pay almost anything to someone who promised immortality convincingly enough. He was eventually exposed during a scandal involving a forged diamond necklace transaction falsely linked to Queen Marie Antoinette, and died in a fortress cell in 1795. 24. A German-born man named Christian Gerhard Schreiter arrived in the United States in the late 1970s as a teenager and spent the next 3 decades cycling through invented identities. He posed as a British aristocrat, a Wall Street trader, and a physics researcher before settling on his greatest role, Clark Rockefeller, a supposed heir to one of the most powerful dynasties in American history. He married a Harvard-educated consultant who earned millions annually. Their social circle never questioned him. No real Rockefeller had ever heard of him. When he kidnapped his daughter during a custody dispute in 2008, investigators connected him to an unsolved double murder in California from 1985. 25. On May 26, 1828, a disoriented teenage boy wandered into the streets of Nuremberg, Germany, barely able to walk, clutching a letter addressed to a local cavalry captain. He could speak only a few words and appeared physically pained by ordinary daylight. He gave only his name, Caspar Hauser. The letter claimed he had spent his entire life locked in a dark cell, never seeing another human face. He quickly became the most debated mystery in all of Europe, amid with theories that he was a concealed royal prince. In 1833, he was found fatally stabbed. His tombstone reads, "Riddle of his time, birth unknown, death mysterious." 26. In 1866, a heavyset Australian butcher named Arthur Orton traveled to England and declared himself to be Roger Tichborne, the missing heir to one of Britain's wealthiest aristocratic families. The real Roger Tichborne had disappeared at sea in 1854. He had been a slim, French-speaking, refined gentleman. Orton weighed close to 300 pounds, spoke no French, and could not recall basic facts about the Tichborne family estate. Yet Roger's elderly mother, desperate to believe her son had survived, accepted him without hesitation. The resulting trial became the longest in English history at nearly 300 days. Orton was convicted of perjury and sentenced to 14 years. 27. For decades in the early 20th century, a man known as Grey Owl lived in the Canadian wilderness as a celebrated Indigenous writer and conservationist. He wrote international best-selling books about nature, performed before King George VI at Buckingham Palace, and is credited with almost single-handedly saving the Canadian beaver from extinction through his passionate advocacy that changed government policy. When he died in 1938, the truth emerged within days. His real name was Archibald Bellany, born in Hastings, England. He had emigrated to Canada at 17 and spent years carefully building an indigenous identity that was never his to claim. The conservation work, however, was completely genuine. 28. In 1997, a Frenchman named Frederick Borden, nicknamed the Chameleon, contacted a family in San Antonio, Texas, and told them he was their missing teenage son, Nicholas Barkley, who had disappeared 3 years earlier at age 13. Borden was 23 years old at the time, had brown eyes while Nicholas had blue, spoke with a noticeable French accent, and looked nothing like the missing boy. The family accepted him and brought him into their home. He lived with them for months. He later admitted doing this in multiple countries, always targeting families desperate enough to believe. A documentary called The Impostor covers the full story. 29. For nearly 30 years, a Spanish man named Enric Marco stood before audiences across Spain and Europe, giving deeply emotional first-hand testimony about surviving the horrors of a wartime internment camp. He served as president of Spain's leading survivor organization and addressed the Spanish parliament as a voice of historical memory. In 2005, historian Benito Bermejo discovered while examining wartime records that Marco had never been imprisoned in any camp. He had gone to Germany during the war as a voluntary worker. Every account of suffering he had shared was taken from the real testimonies of genuine survivors and claimed as his own for 30 years. 30. Ignaz Trebitsch Lincoln was born in Hungary in 1879 and went on to live what can only be described as multiple entirely separate lives. He became a Baptist missionary in Canada, won a seat in the British Parliament, worked as a spy for Germany during World War I, helped plan a right-wing coup attempt in Germany in the 1920s, and eventually relocated to Shanghai, where he reinvented himself as a Buddhist abbot claiming supernatural powers and gathered a devoted following. He died in Shanghai in 1943. Historians who have attempted to write a full biography describe the experience as writing about several completely different people at once. 31. In 1726, an English countrywoman named Mary Toff from Surrey managed to convince the British medical establishment that she was physically giving birth to rabbits, not once but repeatedly over several weeks. The story spread so fast that King George I sent his own personal royal surgeon to investigate. That surgeon examined Mary, observed what he believed was a genuine delivery, and filed an official report confirming it was real. London newspapers ran the story as front-page news. The deception finally collapsed when a hospital porter was caught sneaking a rabbit into her room. She had been inserting dead animal parts herself throughout the entire episode. 32. Frank Abagnale Jr. became one of the most famous names in the history of fraud after claiming he spent his teenage years in the 1960s impersonating a Pan Am airline pilot, a hospital doctor, and a Louisiana attorney, all while cashing millions of dollars in fraudulent checks across 26 countries. His story inspired a celebrated Hollywood film, and he spent decades speaking at FBI training programs as a fraud consultant. However, investigative journalists who spent years examining his claims found almost no evidence to support the most dramatic parts. His actual documented criminal record appears far more modest. The world's most famous liar may have been lying about how good he was at lying. 33. In the early 1800s, a French woman named Hélène Hagado became one of the most successful deceptions in history. For nearly 20 years, she moved from house to house as a domestic servant, and everywhere she went, people mysteriously passed away. She is believed to have ended the lives of over 30 people, including her own employers. She was able to hide in plain sight because she used a substance that was commonly used for cleaning and pest control at the time. She was finally caught in 1851 when a suspicious doctor noticed a pattern in a household where everyone but Hélène was falling ill. When confronted, she claimed she had not been accused of anything yet, which immediately made her the prime suspect. She was convicted and reached her end in 1852. Her greatest weapon was not a disguise. It was the simple fact that no one wanted to believe the quiet, helpful woman in the kitchen was living a total lie. 34. Aleister Crowley was a British occultist born in 1875 who spent his entire adult life constructing one of the most theatrical personal mythologies in modern history. He declared himself the wickedest man in the world, claimed to have received divine revelation from a supernatural entity while in Cairo in 1904, founded a religious movement called Thelema, and built a devoted following among wealthy Europeans who funded his lavish lifestyle. The tabloid press despised him, which only made him more famous. He died nearly broke in a Hastings boarding house in 1947. His physician reportedly died within 24 hours of Crowley's supposed deathbed curse. 35. In the early 20th century in London, a man whose real name was never widely publicized adopted the identity of Prince Constantine of Albania and proceeded to dine at some of London's finest and most exclusive restaurants for months without paying a single bill. He had no forged paperwork, no accomplices, and no elaborate cover story. He simply wore expensive clothing, carried himself with total authority, and correctly calculated that no restaurant manager in Edwardian London would risk the social humiliation of questioning someone who presented himself as foreign royalty. The scheme ended only when someone thought to verify whether Albania actually had a prince by that name. It did not. 36. Following the tragic events in New York on September 11th, a woman named Tanya Head emerged as one of the most visible and emotionally powerful survivor voices in the media. She described in vivid detail being trapped on the 78th floor of the South Tower when the plane struck, the severe burns she suffered in a dying stranger who pressed his wedding ring into her hand, asking her to return it to his wife. She became president of the World Trade Center Survivors Network and led tours of Ground Zero for journalists and officials for years. In 2007, the New York Times revealed she had been in Barcelona, Spain that entire morning. She had never been inside the towers. 37. In the early 2010s, a young Australian woman named Belle Gibson built one of the most successful health and wellness brands in the world around a single personal health scam. She claimed she had received a fake terminal illness diagnosis at the age of 20, rejected conventional medical treatment, and healed herself entirely through clean eating and mindfulness. She launched a best-selling cookbook, a hugely popular app, and attracted hundreds of thousands of followers, many of whom were themselves seriously ill and searching for hope. In 2015, journalists confirmed she had never received any such diagnosis of any kind. No illness, no recovery. The charitable donations she publicly promised were largely never made. 38. In the mid-1600s, an Italian man named Giuseppe Francesco Borri traveled through the royal courts of Europe presenting himself as an exiled prince from the East in possession of ancient alchemical secrets and medical cures far beyond the reach of conventional science. Several European royal courts received him warmly and provided him with generous patronage. He was eventually captured, identified as a fugitive previously sentenced for heresy by the Roman Inquisition, and spent his final years imprisoned in a papal fortress where he died in 1695. What made Borri unusual was that he never actually delivered anything. No gold, no cures, just the endlessly renewable promise that the knowledge was almost ready to be revealed. 39. Across the 20th century, men in countries around the world received military honors, book deals, speaking platforms, and national recognition based on wartime heroism and survival stories that later investigation found to be largely invented. The pattern has repeated itself so consistently and across so many different cultures that researchers who study it have stopped asking why people lie about it and started asking a more important question. Why does it keep working? The answer they consistently arrive at is this: because the people listening want it to be true. The desire to honor genuine suffering is so powerful that it overrides the instinct to question. The lie succeeds because of the best qualities in the people it deceives. 40. Every single person on this list needed one thing they could not produce themselves. They needed someone to trust them, not you specifically, but someone like you, someone who found it uncomfortable to challenge a stranger, someone who thought questioning would seem rude, someone who found it far easier to believe than to verify. That instinct is not a weakness. It is the foundation of how human civilization functions, but it is also, without a single exception, exactly what every person on this list was counting on the moment they opened their mouth. So before you decide which of them was the most clever, ask yourself something honest. What would it actually take to fool you? Because every single person on this list was absolutely certain, right up until the moment they were caught, that they themselves could never be fooled by anyone. Drop in the comments which one disturbed you the most, not which one was the boldest, which one genuinely unsettled you. Because I believe what people choose will reveal something true about them. If this video held you all the way to the end, the like button is right there. Subscribe because the next one goes somewhere even darker.